you'd experience the best of this life.
Will you come up here?
And feel everything along the way.
My biggest regret is that we didn't spend any time together.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Trent, to talk about Ride the Eagle. Now, I understand that you and Jake wrote this during lockdown. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we just sort of squirreled away for a few weeks and wrote a draft. Yeah.
What are the practicalities of that? Do you just have, Zoom meetings like this, or?
Yeah, we had Zoom meetings, and then we also were sort of in each other's bubble, I guess. We were both just bunkered down with our families. And so we would meet, either he'd come to my place or I'd go to his place, and we would sit outside, wear masks, and sort of like break it that way a little bit, as well as a lot of Zooming. And once we had our cast, we sort of did another pass of the script where we would do like Zoom read-throughs and things like that.
There's a really lovely line in the film that says, "What happened to you isn't what's happening to you." What's the message that you want audiences to take out of the film?
That is kind of one of the key kind of tonal sort of lines in the movie. And it's basically just kind of not being defined by your history or the things that happened to you, which is, stuff that's very prevalent in both Jake and my sort of extended families. I looked to my own parents who both had like really tough, like arduous, horrible childhoods in many ways, but then weren't defined by that and went on to kind of like overcome those things, and also, not to dwell on them too much and not to take things too seriously as well.
Is it true that Darcy filmed in your own house?
Yep. We basically used everything we had available. And it was actually how the whole film started, as opposed to, it wasn't like one of us said, "Hey, I've got this great idea for a movie. Do you want to do it?" It was us getting together and going, we might be in lockdown for a long time here. Like all the projects that we were both working on collectively were sort of put on hold. And so we just sort of thought, this could be a nice thing to go and make something that we want to make. We missed just hanging out and making things together. The first sort of part of the process was we got together and went, all right, we're going to make a movie. How can we do it during this time? And what is the story going to be? And so the first week was us just kind of like looking at things that were possible. And we looked at the locations that we had. So it's like we shot at my place, Jake's place. The cabin is Jake's and the dog is Jake's. There's so much of it that we just got from like our own little worlds. We started with the story and then we just kind of like developed it, and we made it better and richer and kind of added more elements to it.
So rather than being restricted, it was actually quite a fortunate turn of events in some ways.
In some ways it was. The things that were kind of great about making something at that time was, well, one, the casting was easier than it ever is because everyone was available. No one was doing anything. We didn't have to take notes from anyone, or we were only sort of beholden to each other in this sort of like commitment of like, we put a bit of money into it ourselves and we're going to make it. And that gave us enough momentum to just keep on with it, because so often, you develop ideas and you don't get to that finished product because it gets lost in development, or you'll go and you'll send your script in and then you get notes 2 months later, and then by then you go, oh, now I'm doing this other thing, and things lose momentum. And so that's what we were very cognizant of, just being like, let's just keep going. We have to keep going all the time.
And what was it like filming in such a remote location like Yosemite? It was actually in Yosemite National Park, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was on the cabin's just on the outskirts of it, but it's great. I mean, I love that part of the world. That's somewhere that I've always like loved. And Jake feels the same way. We're both kind of in love with that part of the world. We had this small little crew. We all went and got tested for COVID. And once we all got negative, we all drove up together, and then we all lived together in the cabin while we made the movie. So it was kind of a nice escape as well.
And did you and Jake write the characters with certain actors in mind?
We did, to a degree. Like Susan Sarandon was definitely who we had in mind for Honey. She was kind of just our ambitious sort of like, wouldn't it be great if we got Susan Sarandon? And then we were just sort of like took a swing thinking we might get her to read it, but we had no expectations of her doing the movie. We were going to get more realistic after that. And then, yeah, Darcy is a friend of mine who I met on The Good Place and adore, and like she's excellent to work with, and so she was the first person we thought of for that role. And J.K. Simmons is someone that I've worked with a little bit as well. He's just such a powerhouse. He's so wonderful. And he made the mistake once of giving me his email address. And so I just emailed him directly. And like, I didn't go through it or anything. I just sort of asked him to do it. Yeah, again, he was just so available.
Was it a bucket list item to get J.K. Simmons to say fuckboy on film? Because that's just brilliant.
It was pretty fun, yeah. And it was funny Jake and I were talking about it, how Jake regrets that he didn't get to actually have it live because JK wasn't there that day shooting that scene. So I was having to do this terrible version of, like, I was reading the lines to him while he did it.
Do you have a J.K. Simmons impression?
No, I didn't even bother trying. I was like, I'm not going to do a computer impression of this. I'll just give you my own very flat. And also, I'm like watching the monitor as well. So it's testament to Jake. I did all of Darcy's scenes on the phone as well. So even like the phone sex scene, that's me reading it out. And I'm just like trying not to overlap, and I'm watching a monitor at the same time. So the read is terrible. I leave these big gaps because I don't want the audio to bleed over or anything like that. So It's not great for acting.
I'm sure it's better than you think it was. When writing it, how did you decide what tasks Leif should be doing? Because some of them are quite, natural, but some of them are quite out there, like catching a fish with your bare hands. How did you decide which ones he was going to do?
The backstory for Susan's character, for Honey, was that she spent a lot of her years wound up in a kind of cult, essentially a cult that was like a community that it had these sort of like life lessons and a way of life and a kind of a mantra for how you should live your life. And this was something that like Jake's character like detested the cult and kind of like blamed that whole thing for kind of like ruining his childhood almost. But we wanted it to be this thing where, when Honey got involved in the cult and raised him in a cult and sort of was an absentee parent in a cult and a community was raising him, all of that was done through the best of intentions. And I think that's true of like how no one gets into a cult to join like a crazy cult. They're trying to do it for their own fulfillment or they see some value in it. And so we sort of like, even though that Honey did sort of like get out and sort of somewhat come to her senses, that the lessons that she teaches Leif are based on the things that first attracted her to that life, and that she did get something out of it, and there was some value to that. And so that was the basis of all the wild things that she gets him to do.
You mentioned that you and Jake and you and Darcy were quite close. Did that make the whole filming process easier or more difficult to direct them in some ways?
Even just for Jake and I, having worked together so much, we don't have to be pleasant with each other. We can just go, no, I don't like that. That doesn't work. Why don't we try this? And it just makes the whole thing kind of more efficient and more streamlined in a way. And also, these are all like, particularly Jake and Darcy are people that I like hanging out with in my free time. So to get to do it for work, it's the best.
I've heard that they gang up on you though. Is that true?
They have a whole bit where they think there's an elaborate long bit about this conspiracy that they've got that I dye my hair because I'm 45, I just don't have much gray at all yet. And it's like the nicest compliment to me is when someone goes, do you dye your hair? It's like, no, never have. And I genuinely haven't on my children. But they find it like a fun bit to make out that I regularly dye my hair. And it's stupid and dumb, but they've gone to some pretty fun extreme lengths with it.
You're in LA, aren't you?
I'm in Sydney. I just got back.
Oh, you just got back. Oh.
I'm in day 2, hotel quarantine.
Oh, wow. So I was going to say, how did you cope being in LA during the pandemic? Was it really tough? Did you miss Australia? I
did. Look, and I probably botched it, honestly. Like if we'd known, I don't know if I would have spent the entire year in LA if I'd known. And it's mostly for me, like the same as it is here for, I think, almost everyone with kids. It's just schools being closed. It really sucks. Thinking back to my own childhood, I can't imagine like having a year or a year and a half without school. What
have you missed most about Australia?
I think just the people. It's funny, like Jake's never been to Australia, but he has I do think the reason we became friends is he has a lot of like the kind of qualities that we attribute with being Australian. He doesn't take things too seriously, and he's kind of, he's a pretty straight talker. And I think it's just that I miss like being in Australia. And also, I think deep down, I like making things in Australian voices a lot of the time as well. I just like the way it sounds, and I like the rhythm of it and stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of what I mostly miss.
And to wrap up, what have you got coming up? What other projects do you have in the works?
I've thankfully don't have a ton of stuff that I'm about to do. I've just finished 3 months in Montreal doing a new show called Ghosts for CBS. And I spent the first part of the year in Calgary doing a show called Guilty Party with Kate Beckinsale for Paramount Plus. And so I've been shooting a lot this year. And so I'm just going to I'm going to hang out and just write and develop and, not do so much on set time.
Enjoy the spring and summer of Australia.
Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah. It's like kind of torturous. I've got this really good view of like the harbour from my window. Yeah. It does look very nice outside.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Trent. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee.